I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the merits of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the merits of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the merits of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient. So last time we started the section on, there's a big section on calm abiding and special insight, but we particularly began looking at the particular section on calm abiding. And so we were on like the preliminaries for developing calm abiding, or prerequisites is a better way to put it. And it began with finding a favorable place for developing calm abiding. And so we covered some of the qualities of there were we covered the 5 qualities of the external place, right? That you could get your necessities, like water, food, and so on. That it was free of bandits or dangerous animals, or so you weren't feeling afraid all the time, because if you're afraid, you can't develop concentration. That it had good earth, which doesn't cause sickness, right? So the place itself doesn't cause sickness. One of the commentaries said also, like, the place where, it's not like things like danger of floods or earthquakes, like, so a place where you're not continually feeling that your life is in danger. Then having companions of similar ethics and views, and the place is quiet, right? Because noise, in other contexts it's fine to be around noise, but if you're trying to have calm abiding, then it's a distraction. It'll distract your mind away, and you won't be able to develop calm abiding. And then we covered the other 2 points, right? Having other prerequisites. So one was having few desires. And that meant, if you don't have few desires, then contemplating the points from the low scope and middle scope to decrease our desires, and then being content with what we do have. So then we pick up with the other prerequisites. So the next prerequisite is says to completely abandon many activities. And Lama Tsongkhapa says, to completely abandon many activities is to completely abandon inferior activities, such as business, excessive association with lay or ordained people, as well as one's medical practice, astrological calculations, and so forth. And so, what that's getting at really is this, if you're trying to develop calm abiding, right, what you want is for your mind to not have so many distractions. And so if you're busy doing, and so, so if you're, associating with lay or ordained people is saying if you're socializing a lot, you're not going to develop calm abiding, right? Because your mind's going to get caught up in what that person say, and then, right, you're going to go sit down and meditate, and your mind's going to start going, was what I said good? And, what did they mean by this? And, if you're either, it'll increase your discursive thinking, and sometimes it'll just increase either your anger or your attachment too. So they're saying, like, decrease your social activities during times like this. And also, even if you're helping others, like through medical practice and so on, he's saying, you take a break from that if you're going to try to develop calm abiding, because, again, it gives, like, what's what we say, right? Even if you're engaged in an activity like a medical practice or astrology or something that's helping, that you're intending to help others, it occupies your mind, and you're not going to be able to focus on the object of your concentration as well. So what he's saying is, if you're going to, when you're trying to develop calm abiding, you adopt a simple lifestyle with very few distractions. And that's what, when we say like somebody's going into retreat, that's what we're talking about, right? Like, the idea of retreat is that you're decreasing your external distractions. And these days, I guess that would include like logging off of email and social media and all that, right? Because they would serve the same. So they would create the same kind of obstacle as the excessive association with lay or ordained people, right? Or as you're associating with people where then your mind's getting preoccupied with all of that. And then your mind gravitates to whatever you're caught up in. And to be clear, right, this is not saying, if your focus at a given time is practicing generosity, then you're going to be involved with people, right? This is saying when you're focusing on calm abiding, you decrease your contact with people, and you limit it to just, it's like a simple lifestyle. The next prerequisite for calm abiding is maintaining pure ethics. And Lama Tsongkhapa says, pure ethics with regard to the pratimoksha and bodhisattva vows is not to tear down the basis. So by the way, pratimoksha and bodhisattva vows, right? Pratimoksha means the vows of, there are various, right, we've gone through this before, there are various categories of pratimoksha vows, but there are, pratimoksha vows for a layperson, right? And then pratimoksha vows for the various levels of ordination, for nuns and for monks and so on. And so, and there are even like the one-day vows also. So the idea here is that whatever vows you've taken, if you're going to be practicing calm abiding, you have to keep them purely, right? And then he says, not to tear down the basis of the trainings through natural or formulated misdeeds. So we've gone that through. I'll just remind you, right? Formulated misdeeds means vows you've taken. They're like, so in other words, they're not natural. Some formulated misdeeds aren't naturally negative. They're negative because you promise not to do them, right? So an example of that that's sometimes given is, sometimes like for example, ordained people, ordained monks and nuns take one of their commitments is to wear the robes of a monk and nun, and to take, to wear regular clothes. That's not naturally, like layperson clothes isn't naturally negative, but it's negative if you took a vow not to do it. But then the natural misdeeds are the things that are, by their very nature, negative, like killing, and stealing, and so on. So you would avoid both of those kinds, all those kinds of negative actions, as best you can. And then Lama Tsongkhapa says here, and if it is torn down due to so if you've been non-conscientious and made a mistake, then you restore it quickly with regret, right? So it means you do the 4 powers of purification. And one of the commentaries said, like, for example, if somebody has done some very heavy negative misdeed, like killed somebody or something of that sort, they're not going to be able to develop calm abiding unless they do purification first. So if somebody's thinking of going into a retreat on calm abiding, they often say, first, do some purification practice. So to contemplate, have I done any heavy negative misdeeds, and I'll purify those before I go into that retreat. So it'd be like a retreat before your calm abiding retreat, where you would purify. But while you're doing the calm abiding practice, you particularly, and remember, like in the 3 higher trainings, the first of 3 higher trainings is ethics, the second is concentration, and the third is wisdom, right? And they sometimes say ethics is like the foundation for concentration. So we have to maintain our ethics if we're going to try to develop concentration effectively. And then the next, of the prerequisites, the way it's described is to completely abandon discursive thoughts of desire. And he says here, you should to completely abandon all discursive thoughts of desire by meditating on their disadvantages for this life, such as being killed or arrested, and for future lives, such as going to lower realms. Or you should meditate thinking all pleasant and unpleasant things in samsara, its cycle of existence, are impermanent and subject to destruction. I will certainly be separated from all of them before long. Why do I get overly attached to them? Right? So what he's getting, and then actually I'll read the quote here. Then he quotes Atisha's Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment. It says, even if you exert yourself greatly, even for 1,000 years, if calm abiding's limbs are impaired, stabilization will not be accomplished. So first of all, I'll make a point about this desire, right? What he's getting at here is, it's similar to what he said above, but if you're going into retreat to try to develop calm abiding, and your mind is obsessively thinking about all the things you want, first of all, you're not going to develop calm abiding, and second of all, trying to develop calm abiding will be like will feel like a prison or something, right? If all you're wanting is to gain more wealth and more popularity and more stuff, well, then going someplace quiet and just focusing on an internal object is going to be actually upsetting and disturbing to you. So if you're going to try to develop calm abiding, and so he's giving you various reasons why, right? So he's saying, actually gives 3 reasons here, right, that you would contemplate before going into this retreat, or, focusing, it doesn't have to be strict retreat, but some kind of calm abiding practice, right? So one is, in this life, right? So you contemplate how, and actually you check your own experience, right? But there is that, so with desire, that the more, so you can actually check for yourself, right, what he's getting at here. But one is you contemplate, so the more I feel craving and desire, the more I suffer, right? Like that my mind is not peaceful, whatever I get, I want more. Even when I get what I thought I want, then I want something else. You contemplate like that, how just the process itself of being caught up in desire is causing me suffering, right, in this life. And then you contemplate how if I don't decrease that desire or stop doing that pattern, I'll continue to suffer throughout this entire lifetime, right, in that way. And then you think, what he's getting at here is, then also if I do that this whole lifetime, then what's the karmic result of that in future lives? Is to go to lower realms and not to have good rebirths. Right? Whereas, so following the mind of desire is not what leads to good rebirths, right? What leads to good rebirths is things like ethics, love, compassion, honesty, integrity, and so on. And so he's saying you think about the faults for future lives, which are that you'll fall to lower realms. Right? And then he says, then he gives another method for decreasing desire, which is the recognition I'm going to die, and everything I have and everything around me is going to fall apart. And I'll be separated from everything, and we don't even know when, right? Like, whether it's because we could die at any time. Also, whatever we have can be taken away even while we're alive. It can end, or it can be taken, like, and if we, I mean, actually, this one is, right, if you think about, if you look around you, it's obviously true, right? People who have made so much effort to accumulate things, then they die. And actually, like, if you think, if you have, let's see what I say, right? Right, if you see, like, where people made a huge effort to gather stuff, and then, like, after they die, if you've ever been, have you ever been there, like, after somebody died, like, when, like, if you have to go through, or people have, if you're helping somebody go through their stuff, right, and they're like, all the stuff that the person, like, treasured, either people grab it and, like, they're fighting over, I want this, no, I want it, or something, right? The people are grabbing it for themselves, or it's like a hassle, like, how do you even get rid of this, right? It's like, oh, who am I going to call to take all this garbage or something? It's like, it's one or the other, right? So either people grasp it and want it, or they throw it away like it's trash, which it is then, right? It becomes trash.
Yeah, so that reminds me of my experience where I bought a $50,000 carpet for $100. And I guess when they bought it or whatever, it was a lot of value, but the person died, and the sons and daughters don't even know the value of the carpet.
Yeah, right. It's true, isn't it? Yeah, sometimes you get good deals on things. Right, and that other person would have treasured that, right?
Exactly. And
when they were alive, if their son or daughter had said, "Oh, I'm going to get rid of this for $100,"
yeah.
they might have died from a heart attack. That's funny. Oh, that's funny. But yeah, so it's like, it's funny, right? That stuff, and so we're going to be parted from it all. So if you contemplate like that, and they say sometimes, like, one metaphor, one example of this that sometimes is mentioned is like, as they say, right? Like, if you're about, like, if you're staying in like a hotel room and you're about to leave, right? Like, it's like you wake up in the morning and you're checking out, and then you see there's something imperfect about the room, but you're just about to check out. Well, you don't care, right? It's like, well, it's not my room. I'm about to leave. But what they say is like, our attitude towards our own stuff, our own house, should be like that. Like, in other words, recognize, well, I'm about to leave, so the details are like, I'm about to check out, so it's not so important. That you have the mind of somebody who's leaving. Does that make sense? That's what he's getting at here, where he says, right, I will certainly be separated from all of it before long, so why do I get overly attached? Right? Like, could you imagine, like, if you were in a hotel room and you're about to check out, and you think, oh, I don't like the lamp. Like, I'm really upset that it's not a prettier lamp or something. Like, it would be idiotic, right? Because, like, who cares about the lamp when you're about to leave the room? What he's saying is, like, well, the lamp in your own home, it's the same deal, and even your own, all these things, and there's all the things you get attached to are like that. They may disappear at any moment, and you may, if they don't disappear, you will. Right? And then somebody will say, who did this used to belong to? I can't remember their name. I don't know who that was. So it's like that. So then he's saying, so you have to contemplate like that. So you have to think over and over again in those ways. And now we can make sense of what he's saying here. So he's saying, that Atisha said, even if you make great effort at calm abiding, if you don't have these prerequisites, then you won't achieve calm abiding. One commentary points out that you have to check, like some of the, it says some of the prerequisites are absolutely required, and others are required for most people, but there are exceptions where somebody can maybe achieve calm abiding without every single one of these. But certainly you need most of these prerequisites, and especially the sort of like not having noise, and also your mind not having so much desire and so on, and being content. Those are absolute prerequisites. And then he mentions there are more advice and more things that one can sort of set up that are described in another text, the Shravaka levels, but he doesn't go into detail about that. Okay, so then he says, having created those prerequisites, so if you were going to really, I guess I'll point something out here too, like it doesn't say this in this text, but oftentimes, like when people are trying to develop calm abiding, they'll actually one commentary points out, some people can develop, can progress in the development of concentration and progress through the levels, to varying degrees in daily life up to a point. So you can make progress, but they oftentimes people go off for like a period of retreat to go deeper into calm abiding practice and so on. So yeah, that's often done. So then it says, having gathered your situation like as best you can, and having prepared yourself psychologically in these ways, right, decreasing your desire and cultivating contentment, then you are going to start practicing. And so he says, how do you begin? And he says, well, you begin with the 6 preparatory practices that were taught at the very beginning of this text, right? Cleaning the room and putting out offerings and so on, just like you would with any other meditation on Lam Rim, on the stages of the path. So you do your the 6 preparatory practices, and those also include like the 7 limbs, remember all that. So that we've studied that before. He says, and then you meditate on the he says the core meditation topics shared with the lesser and intermediate beings. So here the idea is that you actually review, like you go through in your mind, actually really you should go through all the meditations through bodhicitta. Does that make sense? Developing bodhicitta motivation. So you would start by thinking about the low scope, right? So you would think about precious human rebirth, about impermanence and death. You would go through the teachings on refuge and karma. Then you would go through the teachings on the middle scope, right? The faults of samsara, and the Four Noble Truths, the aspiration to achieve liberation, and then bodhicitta. And that's setting up your motivation, right, for the session. Right, so you would actually do like, if you're familiar with those topics and you have some level of experience with them, then you can go through them very quickly. If you don't have much experience with them, you spend longer, right? To develop a real sense, because actually, it's a really important point, right? Remember this. If you haven't developed renunciation, right, then your practice of meditation doesn't become a cause for liberation from samsara, right? And if you don't develop bodhicitta, it doesn't become a cause of Buddhahood, of enlightenment, of full enlightenment. So you have to spend long enough on those motivations to develop a correct motivation for your session. And if you review them over and over again, it becomes more and more familiar and easier, but you have to review them. Does that make sense? So he's saying, meditate on the whole Lam Rim, but again, if you're very familiar, you can just like go through the topics very quickly. If you're not, spend longer. Also, it depends where your mind's at. If you already have a strong sense of compassion and bodhicitta and renunciation and so on, then you can do it quickly. If your mind has some sort of distracted other state, then you have to spend longer to get back to that. And next he says, if you're going to try to develop calm abiding, to put your body in the correct posture, which is the sometimes it's called, here he says 8. Sometimes it's called 7, or sometimes it's called 8-point posture of Vairochana. And there's 7 points to the posture, and then sometimes they add an 8th, which is the breath. So you can count it either. It's the same thing. It's 7 if you just count the body posture, or if you add the breath, then it becomes 8. I want to see if I can find. There was a. I don't know if I have the quote. I'll find it. Oh, maybe it's not in here. And it's not in Lama Tsongkhapa. There was a. Sometime Kintram she mentions. I thought there's a famous, kind of famous quote from Marpa Lotsawa, the teacher of Milarepa, where he said something like, I can't remember the exact wording, but he basically was saying, you know, he was like saying how, he was saying something like the teaching tradition, the tradition of instructions that he was sharing were so great that even just the posture, like even if you got the posture right, meaning this posture, that alone would have humongous benefits or something. That was, it's like, even if all you got to was the posture and you just sat in that posture, your mind would become more peaceful. So it was extremely valuable, even just the posture part. And so he said, Lama Tsongkhapa here says, as it says in Kamalashila's stages of meditation, so here he says, you should sit on a very soft and comfortable seat and adopt the body posture with 8 characteristics. So first of all, the seat, to explain that part, he's saying here it should be comfortable, right? So you should have like, something under your knees, like, so it's not disturbing your legs. And then they say the cushion should be like just very slightly higher in the back and lower in the front, ideally. So ideally the cushion would be just slightly, like, slightly tilted towards the front, not too much, like sliding off it, but just very slightly. And it should be soft and comfortable. And then, so then I'll go through the 8 points. So we're just comparing Khenpo Rinpoche's commentary on this to the other. Okay, so in terms of the body posture, he goes through, I'll go through all 8 points. So the first one is your legs. And so he says, ideally the legs should be in the, like, they usually call it full Vajra posture, although in the West sometimes it's called full lotus from yoga, I think, tradition. Right, so that's where each of the feet is on the opposite thigh, right, inside of your thigh. Then Lama Tsongkhapa says, if that's uncomfortable, then put it in the half, so like mine are now. So where one is on the thigh and the other is beneath. And so either of those is acceptable. And so that's the idea, actually, and so the full Vajra posture is the ideal posture for meditation. That's why, the Buddha is always depicted, right, sitting in that. If you see the Buddha statues, and Buddha statues from around different cultures even are usually pictured in full Vajra posture, right? So we're kind of sitting in the posture with the whole posture is kind of like the Buddha. So, and again, you have to do what you can do. If your body won't do that safely, then you approximate it as best you can. But Lama Tsongkhapa is giving the ideal approach here. Then the second point is the eyes. And what it says for this, in this, for developing calm abiding, so in this instruction tradition, the eyes aren't wide open, but they're also not closed. So they're like the Buddha's eyes. They're kind of like half closed, and they're looking downward towards, like, in the direction of the tip of your nose. So you'd be sitting, right, with your eyes kind of like part open, part closed. Then the third point is the body posture is upright, right? And so you're not leaning forward, you're not leaning backward, you're not leaning to either side. Right? But the body, like the spine should be like a, like an arrow, or like a series of discs sort of stacked on top of each other. Whereas you should be straight up and down, and also straight from side to side. And with that one, Lama Tsongkhapa includes, and then bring your mindfulness inward. So even though your eyes are half closed and half open, you're not focusing on your visual consciousness, right? You bring your attention inward inside the mind. The attention goes inward inside. Then the fourth point is the shoulders, and what it says is that the shoulders should be even, right? So it shouldn't be, neither shoulder should be higher. Neither one should be higher. They should be even with each other and straight. The fifth point is that the head should be straight, so it should be straight in the sense of not being tilted either direction, but also you should be looking up or looking down. It should be kind of natural, but not not tilted downward or upward, not tilted either side. The sixth point is your teeth and lips, and so that one says they should be placed naturally. And there was some discussion in the commentary that different commentaries say slightly different things. Like some say have them closed or have them open, but in the end, what the best instruction seems to be is leave them in a way that's comfortable and natural. So like how you would naturally do it, so your mouth is relaxed. And then the seventh point is that your tongue is against the palate gently touches the palate, or the top of your mouth, the top of your mouth. And the idea there is that that helps to, as you start developing deeper states of concentration, you don't want to have to be swallowing all the time, so that kind of stops saliva from becoming distracting. One other point that's usually mentioned, that's not in the seven, is the hands, right? So the hands usually go at the navel, and in this tradition, you put your left hand on the bottom and your right on top, and you bring your two thumbs together, like almost like a triangle, right? So like that here. And then the eighth point is the breath, and what Lama Tsongkhapa here says is the breath, to make your breath, to let the breath be slow, quiet, natural, peaceful, like that. You mentioned briefly, there's a tradition that's not, Lama Tsongkhapa doesn't mention here, but he mentions it elsewhere. So if you're, you can just, you can start off, first of all, like there's sometimes, actually they mentioned in one commentary, they mentioned 3 different ways you can do this, so with the breath part. One is you can just do some breathing meditation, right? Just watch the breath as it goes in and out, like we've done here many times, right? That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing this is you can count 21 breaths. So the first one you don't count, right? You just watch your breath for a while. The second way is you actually count 21, with one being out and breath goes out and in, that's 1, out and in 2, out and in, like that. And then there's a third method, which is called the 9-round breathing technique. And in that technique, you actually you start off by covering your left nostril and breathing in through the right, and then you cover, and then when you cover your right and you breathe out through the left. And as you breathe in, you imagine kind of light energy from all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas coming into your body and purifying it. And then as you breathe out, you imagine all your afflictive emotions and stale winds and kind of stale energy and negativities going out through your left nostril. And so you do 3 of that circuit. Does that make sense? Then you do the opposite. You cover your right nostril, breathe in with your left, and then cover your left and breathe out with your right. And you do 3 of that, and again you do the same process. You're breathing in the light nectar, light nature, the wisdom energy of all the Buddhas. You breathe out all the stale winds and so on of the right nostril. So that's 6 now, right? And then the last 3 would be you breathe in through both nostrils and you breathe out through both nostrils. And actually, what I just described that, and again, you breathe. Imagine the light rays coming in and going out, and purifying, sending out all your afflictive emotions, distractions, and negative energy in your body, negative sort of stale winds and so on in your body, and so that's the brief description of the 9-round breathing. And then there's a more detailed description of that in the highest yoga tantra teachings, where you actually, it's the same breathing process, but you correlate it to the subtle
Left and right
channels, the body and the central channel also. So there's a whole way that's described, and that's taught in various tantric teachings. And so the idea there, though, just to be clear, is the idea with the breath and the posture, a few things. One is, so actually if you check that, actually I'll mention this because it's important, I think. If you start to become aware of your breath, right, and actually if you just do breathing meditation, this starts to happen, you'll start to notice that if you're having an afflictive emotion, right, then your breathing is not smooth and calm and natural, right? Your breath is actually agitated. And in the tantric teachings, they say the mind, they use this analogy, they say the mind rides on the breath. That's the way they put it. So the idea here is that if your breath is agitated, then your mind is agitated. If your mind is agitated, then your breath is agitated. And so if you're going to try to develop calm abiding, right, actually you can hear the first word of that is calm, right? So your breath has to be calm to start with. I mean, as the beginning point, say. And so all these techniques, right, just watching the breath or counting 21 breaths or doing the 9-round breathing, the intention of all of those is to calm your breathing, which will then calm your mind. Does that make sense? And when Lama Tsongkhapa is saying here, when the breath is slow, quiet, natural, and peaceful, that means that the mind has settled also. And so those go together. And so these techniques, so first of all, this posture in and of itself helps to settle the subtle winds of your body. That's part of the benefit, that's what Marpa was getting at when he talked about the benefits of this posture. There's a whole teaching on that. But anyway, they actually describe how each element of the posture is designed to affect certain subtle energies in your body. So just sitting in that posture actually helps settle your subtle energies of your body down. And then if you do the breathing meditation on a 9-round breathing, it further helps to settle those subtle energies, which helps to make your mind more peaceful and more suitable for meditation. Does that make sense? And so the posture itself does that, and then also the breathing exercises do that. Yeah.
So from deeper point of view, so mind is mounted on the breath, the wind. So, from tantric point of view, when you say afflictions, like, for example, anger, or for example, jealousy, whatever, the practitioner, can they break it down to that level on the wind, like this wind is causing this sort of thing, like a highly realized breath?
Yeah, they do.
They could break it down to the wind, the type of wind.
Yeah, in highest yoga tantra, that's only taught in the highest yoga
Highest
tantra
yoga.
teachings, but that is taught there, and they say that, let's see right. Yeah, they say that people who are, like if somebody's practicing, they actually, I'll just share this I won't go into detail, but they actually say like, at that level of practice, they actually can, so for example, like when we watch our breath, we say, we notice, okay, I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out, I'm focusing on the air going out of my nose or something. In highest yoga tantra, they actually start to notice very subtle movements of the wind. They can sense which winds are going through which channels. You can actually tell, like, is that when you breathe through your nose when you first wake up, is it more going out of my right? You also, if you ever check, it's true actually. Sometimes a little more air comes out of your right nostril, sometimes a little more out of your left. That relates to the subtle winds. And they actually are aware, okay, it's going this way, the winds are flowing in this manner, and now they're flowing in that manner. They shift after a certain amount of time, and then something in your mind also shifts at those times. So they can actually be aware of all those types of subtle, which winds or which energies are affecting, and how the mind and those subtle energies relate. Yeah, they do all that.
And actually, Kala Sukra Tantra, there's a cycle to it. Right?
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it goes through patterns. The breathing actually goes through subtle patterns that, actually, Yeah, and you can watch them. Actually, this is fun, like it's almost as Dalai Lama once said about that point. I remember he was saying that different tantras actually teach slightly different patterns of how the breath goes. And then he was saying one practitioner went to a retreat and he would practice Kala Chakra and some other tantras. And then he said, "Oh, my breath goes according to the Kala Chakra." Now he saw it from his own experience that the description of the Kala Chakra occurs. And he said those are the reason they're different, slightly varied. They're all similar, but slight variation. And Dalai Lama said is because people's physical makeup is slightly different, different individuals, and so different tantras are suited to different people whose physiology just has slight differences, and so then you want to use the tantra that corresponds to your own physiology because it'll help you more effectively. Yeah.
Predisposition.
Exactly. Yeah, natural. It's just like natural to that person. It's certain whatever for whatever reasons. We all have different. The same way we all have different medicines work for different people or something differently. It's like our physiology has slight differences. Yeah, and I don't know if I'll go. I mean, Lama Tsongkhapa doesn't go into all this so much detail. Khyentse Rinpoche actually, in his so one point is, I'm going to say a couple other points. They saw it the 7 or 8 point posture of Vairochana, and so let's mention this part. So Vairochana is one of the 5. There are like sometimes in Tibetan Buddhism and Tantric Buddhism, there's discussion of the 5 Buddha families, and so Vairochana is is one of the 5 is usually depicted as a white, like a, I don't mean like Caucasian, I mean like a pure white, like a, I can't think of a picture, like white Tara there, like, and there's Akshobhya is dark blue, Ratnasambhava is yellow, Amitabha is red, so each Buddha is a different color. Anyway, Vairochana is said to represent enlightened body. So that's why the body posture is connected to Vairochana. Amitabha is connected, who's red, is connected to enlightened speech. And Akshobhya, who's blue, is connected to enlightened mind. So anyway, Vairochana is connected to the enlightened body, and so adopting that posture is connecting you to Vairochana, right, and to your own potential for having an enlightened body in the future. And yeah, here I was just going to mention this related to your question. Khyentse Rinpoche is pointing something out. He says, remember I was saying the back should be straight and erect? He says, keeping your back straight opens up the channels of your body, allowing the subtle wind energies to flow in a smooth and balanced way. As the mind follows these winds, this makes it easier to control your mind. Now he gets into a little detail. He says, if you lean to the right, it puts pressure on your right channel, through which the wind associated with anger flows, making you more likely to generate anger. This is like, so if you're in meditation, that's why you don't want to lean to the right. He says, if you lean to the left, it puts pressure on your left channel, through which the wind associated with attachment flows, and makes you more likely to generate attachment. Due to the movements of the winds, leaning back makes you more likely to generate pride. Leaning forward makes it more likely to generate dullness. That we can kind of see, right? If you're leaning forward, you tend to get dull. To avoid these negative factors, try to keep your posture upright while meditating. And he actually goes through, if you want to, I won't read it now, but Khyentse Rinpoche in this book goes through some detail about, he said, I'll just read the very beginning. He says, from the perspective of Highest Yoga Tantra, the elements of this posture help you to control the 5 primary and 5 secondary wind energies of your body. And then he goes through each one. Like he describes how each part of the posture helps to control, control, that's the word he uses. Different ones of those 5, there are 10, 5 primary and 5 secondary, so 10 sort of particular wind energies in the body and those are the focus. If you study Highest Yoga Tantra completion stage, that's what people are working with on that level. But here he's saying the posture in and of itself starts to work with those energies. And he goes through a description of which energies are subdued or controlled by which part of the posture. So just through that, though, again, if somebody's actually practicing that, they could actually check. Does that make sense? So they would start to notice, well, which way does my body tend to go, and does that relate to my own afflictive emotions and so on, and then trying to correct it by keeping the body in the right posture. This one is the easy path. Yeah, and it's a commentary to a shorter Lamrim by Gyume Khyentse Rinpoche, and but he goes into detail about that point about the subtle energies, which Lama Tsongkhapa doesn't doesn't mention, but I just thought to at least mention it.
I don't Lord and Lord. You.
I edited that, but yeah. Right.
So like when the Buddha died, he died on the right side.
Yep.
Why not the left side?
And they say that, so like, actually, so let's see. So actually, he didn't just, like, when they say that when the Buddha died, he laid on his right side, he actually covered his right nostril. And they say that's associated with, that it symbolized suppressing anger, actually. Like, in other words, and the Buddha didn't have any anger, but it was symbolic for other people, saying that this is, what's there, that because he was basically, they say one way of describing that from the energy channel's perspective, is that it's saying to people the worst thing, one of the worst ways to die would be with anger in your heart. And so, and one thing, I mean, there are various things that symbolizes, but one is suppressing, that the disciples, we should be sure to suppress anger at the time of death, because that will cause a lower rebirth. And so they actually say if a person can, it's good to lay on your right side and cover your right nostril as you die. When the person is able to, and it suppresses the karmic wind of anger, and therefore the person won't die with that. So yeah, so that's a summary of the. So actually, you say, like, it's interesting, isn't it? Like, you get a sense, like, just the body. You start to get a feeling for how complicated, not complicated, it's simple, but how many benefits there are. I mean, there is the body posture. You don't have to know all that. You can just sit in the right posture. But if you start to study the benefits of that posture, it's a humongous topic, actually, right? But you know, just sit in the right posture in and of itself helps the mind to focus.
Also, in the clear light of sleep, they talk about falling asleep on your right side in that
Exactly.
posture.
Yeah. Yeah, same idea, and for some of the same reasons. Okay, so then it says, maybe I'll go through, okay, so then he says, actually, well, maybe I won't read all this. Next, Lama Tsongkhapa has like kind of a transitional paragraph where he talks about different authors who have talked about different, different descriptions of calm abiding, the process of developing calm abiding. And he talks about, so for example, he says, in most expositions of Lam Rim, the stages of the path, it says that calm abiding is accomplished by way of 8 factors set forth in the separation of the middle and extremes, that abandon 5 faults. So he goes through like various, he's saying then there's a 6 power. He's going through, he's saying there are different texts that sort of lay out what you need to develop calm abiding, the actual inner process, using different lists and different ways of describing that. And I won't go through all that because he's going to present his summary, or his his detailed explanation of how you practice calm abiding. But here he's just pointing out that there are many different texts that give us different details. And then he says something in that same paragraph. He says, he goes through different masters who have, Tibetan, Indian masters who have who've written different texts on this topic. And then he says, in Mantrayana, you also need to know them, these points. And so what he's getting at there is an important point for those who are practicing Mantrayana or Tantra, which is, it's not like if you practice Tantra, you don't need to know this. In other words, it's the same process. Like in Tantra, there might be, if you're going to try to develop calm abiding using Tantra, Tantra adds additional points about like some additional skillful means for developing concentration. But what Lama Tsongkhapa here is saying is those additional skillful means in Tantra are not a substitute for this. They help you accomplish this, but you need to know this if you're going these techniques for developing calm abiding. Whether you're going to use Sutrayana approach or Tantrayana approach, either way you need to know these details of how you progress in calm abiding. And so it's not like, because sometimes people have this wrong idea that, oh, I'm practicing Tantra, I don't have to worry about calm abiding. And what he's saying is, no, you need to develop calm abiding through the practice of Tantra. And Tantra may add some points to help you skillfully progress, but it's not a substitute. You still need to know these methods.
So the thing I don't understand is like, Rinpoche says that when you develop calm abiding through Tantra, it's kind of like close to calm abiding. He doesn't say it's calm abiding, but he says it's close to calm abiding. Like calm abiding, but it's not calm abiding.
Oh, the idea there is like, what he's saying when he says that is that, so like in highest yoga tantra, if you finish what's called the gross level of the completion of the generation stage, where you can keep, I think the definition is 4 hours of keeping concentration on the complete mandala, that level is close to or similar to kama abiding, but it's not yet full kama abiding.
Yeah.
Because kama abiding itself comes later. Actually, you do then, because then if you've studied the highest yoga tantra, there's the gross generation stage, then there's the subtle generation stage, and then there's the completion stage. And so actually, when you develop the gross generation stage, Rinpoche will say that's similar to kama abiding, but it's not yet fully kama abiding. That comes, for some people that comes in the subtle generation stage, and for some people that comes, I think, in the beginning of the very beginning of the completion stage. So you develop actual kama abiding a little. You still develop it in highest yoga tantra, but a little not when you get the gross generation stage. So I think that's what he's saying when he said that.
I don't know tantra. So I don't
Okay,
know.
that's what he meant though. Yeah, it's not that you don't develop it at all.
Yeah.
You do still develop it. It's just you don't develop it at that point.
Yeah.
That's what he meant, I think.
Yeah.
But okay, so I'm not going to go through all the different lists. He's just saying there are different lists that you can use. But I will mention he mentions here 5 faults, and I'll mention that brief. I'm going to go into just a little detail about that, because then he's going to get into the first fault. And so basically with the 5 faults, it's 5 things you have to overcome in order to develop calm abiding meditation. And the first of them, and they're emphasized in this order. So the first, and I'm just going to cover these briefly, we're going to cover them in more detail later, so I'm not going to go into huge detail right now. But the first fault is laziness. So laziness that doesn't want to bother meditating, and isn't going to make effort at meditation. Because if you're, so that's obvious, right? If you're feeling lazy about meditation, you're not going to progress in meditation. The second fault is forgetfulness. The third fault is, well, there are different translations for these, but I'll call them laxity, like the mind being lax or the mind being excited. That's the third, that pair is the third fault. The fourth fault is when you have laxity and excitement, not applying the antidotes to those faults. Or actually with any of the faults, I guess, not applying antidotes. And then the fifth is over-application of the antidotes once the fault has been removed. So as if you're feeling, say, excitement, and you apply an antidote to it, then you stop. Right? And you don't keep applying the antidote, because that's going to become a distraction for your meditation. So there comes a point where you have to stop applying the antidote and just abide on your object. So those are the 5 faults to meditation, to calm abiding, or 5 faults they call them, obstacles or faults in your meditation practice. Lama Tsongkhapa now turns to just the first. He spends a little bit of time on just the first of those 5 faults, which is laziness. And he says, and really, if you pause for a moment, right? He addresses laziness first because, obviously, if we're lazy in regards to our meditation, then all the rest is not going to be, we don't need to know the rest of the instructions until we overcome laziness, because we won't be practicing. So he says, if you cannot put an end to laziness, which does not delight in the cultivation of meditative stabilization, but rather enjoys the opposite, it will prevent you from engaging in meditative stabilization all along. And even if you achieve it once, it will not be possible to be persistent, and therefore it will deteriorate quickly. For this reason, it is of great importance to put an end to laziness at the outset. Does that make sense? So he's saying, if you're lazy, first of all, you won't develop concentration, and even if you do develop a little bit of concentration, you won't keep practicing, so it'll fade away. And now, for each of the faults, there are antidotes. Does that make sense? For each of those 5 faults, there are various antidotes. And so Lama Tsongkhapa now teaches the 4 antidotes to laziness. And he says here, it's interesting, he presents them in the, he presents them in the reverse order from the order in which you cultivate them. So he starts at the end with the ultimate antidote, and then he goes backwards to the most simple antidote. And it'll become clear as I read it. So he says, now if you achieve pliancy in which your body and mind expand with bliss, You will not become weary day or night in applying yourself to virtue, whereby laziness will be stopped. Then he says to generate it, meaning to generate that bliss and pliancy, you must be able to continually maintain joyous effort for meditative stabilization, the cause for generating pliancy. To generate that, you need to intense, sustained aspiration of striving for meditative stabilization, and a cause of that, as a cause of that kind of that, you need firm faith, of a strong fascination, and so on. We'll do the rest. So what he's getting at here is this. And I'm going to present them first in the reverse order, like he does, and then I'll explain them in the forward order, like from the order in which you practice them. What he's saying to begin with is he's saying, okay, so there's laziness, right? And laziness doesn't want to do. Laziness is a mind that doesn't. How does he say it? Doesn't take joy or doesn't delight. That's what he says, right? He says, if you cannot put an end to laziness, which does not delight in cultivating meditative stabilization, right? So remember this point. We've said this before. From a Buddhist perspective, from a Buddhist perspective, laziness doesn't necessarily mean like. Actually, it's funny. Like, first of all, laziness doesn't necessarily mean just laying around doing nothing, right? So they would say, like, because there was here, it means not delighting in doing virtuous things, right? So a very energetic person, from a Buddhist perspective, would be lazy, right? Whereas if you're very energetic about, like, trying to become the most popular person, that's lazy, right? From a Buddhist perspective. If you're very energetic about making a lot of money to be the richest person around, from a Buddhist perspective, that's lazy, because it has no meaning. In other words, if it's not something meaningful, if it's not connected to love, right, or to compassion, or to wisdom, and so on, then it's lazy because it's meaningless. So here, and so laziness in that sense, like, it could be not practicing generosity, not practicing ethics, we could be lazy in regards to our ethics, for example. But here it's laziness in respect to meditation, right? Because we're talking about meditation. So here, laziness is a mind that doesn't delight. Right? So there, again, I'll point out something else. Even if you're practicing meditation, if you're not delighting in it, if you're not, like, energized, if you're not enthusiastic, that's laziness. Does that make sense? So laziness is a mind that, so the opposite of laziness, right, means you delight in it. You find joy in doing what's positive. In this case, it's meditation. And so one more point. It's just I'm just pausing for a second. It's kind of funny, right? Because in our culture, like in our culture, like, actually, if you were to, like, just go out in the world or something around here, right, and you were to say, oh, I spent, like, whatever, like, it's like I spent a lot of time just sitting, like, focusing on one thing. Somebody might go, oh, that's lazy, right? And then, like, if you were saying to somebody else, well, they said, oh, I was busy, like, working 75 hours a week. Then if you were practicing Dharma, you would say, oh, you're lazy. And so there would be two different perspectives on what laziness is. Like, in the Washington, D.C. area, it would be, like, contradictory. Right? Because a Buddhist practitioner would say, oh, 75 hours a week of work is laziness. Right? Then from a person who's working 75 hours a week, they would say, well, sitting around watching, like, meditating on the mind is lazy. So it would be two very opposite perspectives on what does the word lazy mean. But here you get the idea of what lazy means. In respect to meditation, it means not finding joy in meditation. So now, I'm going to do it in the reverse order, like Lama Tsongkhapa does. When you achieve calm abiding, you achieve this thing that I've mentioned once before, I think, called, which he says here. It's bliss, like physical and mental. There's both physical and mental, bliss and pliancy. And so both your body and your mind have these experiences, first of all, of bliss, and second of all, of pliancy. Pliancy means, like, flexibility, like that you can just do whatever you apply yourself to, your body, they say, feels light and flexible and happy to do it. Like, your body doesn't feel heavy. Like, the opposite of pliancy is, like, like when you feel fatigue. So, but pliancy in this sense is like a body and a mind that don't become fatigued, but that always feel light and flexible and applicable. Like, like sometimes if you want to, like, study something, but your mind feels too heavy and you can't concentrate, pliancy is the opposite of that. Whatever you want to apply your mind to, you can just do it, like, it just flows into that. Does that make sense? And it feels bliss at the same time. So what he's saying is, when you've achieved calm abiding, you have bliss and pliancy. So at that time, there is no laziness, right? Like, that's the ultimate antidote to laziness. Because if your mind is blissful and flexible or pliant in that way, then you'll it's easy, he says laziness will be stopped, right? Those things, that bliss and that pliancy, stop laziness. I want to point out, I'm going on a very short tangent for a second. Because Ken Srimshay points this out also in the Easy Path, is, when you fully qualify bliss and pliancy are only achieved at the level of calm abiding. But as we progress along the stages of developing meditative concentration, we develop gradually little bits more and more of pleasure in meditation, experiences of actual pleasure, and also experiences of kind of flexibility and lightness. They're not yet the actual bliss and pliancy of calm abiding, but I guess the point is that as we develop those qualities, they also help us. Does that make sense? The more you develop those qualities of meditation, the more it becomes easier not to be lazy. And actually, isn't that true? Like, in other words, if you think about it from the perspective of when people meditate, like people who start to meditate, like if they don't start to develop some sense of pleasure from that, and joy in that, and sort of their body feeling better and their mind feeling better, well then people stop, don't they? Like there's people who say, well, why would I want to keep doing that? I could go, whatever, do something else. I'll go play a video game or get drunk or whatever, whatever they want to do. But if you start to develop these qualities, then you keep meditating, right? Does that make sense? And if they keep getting more, then you well, why would I want to, I want to spend more time in meditation and less time on other things because it's more pleasurable, right?
But it takes a long time, though.
But I guess that's what Ken Srimshay was pointing out, is that to develop fully qualified calm abiding takes a lot of, it's difficult. Even the beginning levels.
Even the little bit takes long.
Yeah, okay, that may be. And that's the but whatever progress we can make, it helps. Yeah.
That's my question, because I'm kind of trying to help what you said, trying to find a way to help people to get to that stage, because I'm always, telling people meditate in yoga, and yoga's just a moving meditation. But some people, they have so many distractions in their mind where it's very easy to clear my mind, and I'm just fully, and I enjoy it. Sometimes, I am lazy. I am for whatever reason, I don't get to it during the day, which I should. But my goal is every day I should. What can I tell these, or how can I help these people to achieve that? Because I do it very basic, right? And it's just kind of starting with focusing on the breath and controlling the breath for them to achieve that and some of the benefits to meditation.
I'll say a couple of thoughts, a couple of 2 points, I guess, to answer that in two different ways. One is, actually, the traditional teachings say this, and also the research says this, is if somebody's just starting with meditation, it's really better to do very short sessions, because if they're not yet having if it's really hard to concentrate, the idea is you want to concentrate really well. If somebody can do it for a long time, great, but it's better to do a very short time and really concentrate well than a longer time where the person just gets frustrated. So one is to really keep it very short, so a lot of times in my other role as where I work as a psychologist, I'll often teach people mindfulness practice, but I might start with 3 minutes, really 3 minutes, and then eventually build up to 5 and then 7, so because they're very short. The person goes, oh, that was kind of nice, they have a kind of pleasant experience, because they just have some experience of they're continually caught up in discursive thinking, and they have some experience where for a minute their discursive thinking kind of stopped or decreased a little bit, and they feel some pleasure from that, and then I stop. Because if we go on too long, their discursive thinking will come back, and they'll start to associate meditation with that, which is not what meditation is supposed to be. So I would literally keep it 3 minutes, then 5, then 7, and I'll sometimes say, well, eventually build up to 10, and then don't do more than 10 for a long time. I'll say that to the person, because it's if they keep it short, they can have some experience actually of, oh, okay, wow, my discursive thinking decreased a little bit. And that's better than a longer session where they're having, where they're not having some experience of that. So that's one point. And then another point is what Lama Tsongkhapa just said, which is, think about the prerequisites, right? Like, in other words, if the person who's starting to meditate has, because I guess I'll say it this way, like, he points out, right, Lama Tsongkhapa says, that the person first has to meditate on the faults of excessive craving and desire and so on. And I think part of what he's implying there is this, is if somebody doesn't have that understanding, there's a common experience when somebody starts to meditate, where like, okay, so let's say like if you're a modern person in this culture, right, there's continuous opportunity for distraction, right, like, or especially nowadays, right, like, first of all, there's like, media and cell phones, and like, so people are used to distracting themselves all the time almost, right, and then people are playing, like watching TV and watching YouTube and, doing all these different apps and watching, all these different things, right, plus all the people and so on. And so there's an experience, I think, that happens where if you start to meditate, or a person begins to meditate, sometimes what happens is that, let's just say, right, they see what's actually going on in their own mind for a moment. And what's going on in their mind is not pleasant, actually, right? Whereas there's a continuous stream. What the person comes to, a lot of times the person starts to meditate, and what they find is like, well, that's not fun. What I'm seeing is continuous stream of like, either anger, desire, fear, worry, like all these different afflictions, actually. And they're getting more in touch with those, actually. And so there can be an unpleasant experience, actually, for that person. Whereas, like, I don't want to do that because that's like, and actually they sometimes think it's because of the meditation. Sometimes people think that actually, oh, well, if I meditate, it makes me have all, it's like, no, that's just what's there. It's like, and the person doesn't know that's what's there because they distract themselves all the time from what's there. And then they have a valid point, right? Like, in other words, well, why would I want to meditate? I'm going to get in touch with something so unpleasant, which is how I actually feel, like, and that's like, I mean, I really respect that in some way. The person's being honest. They're like, why, like, I'm not going to do that. It's like not fun. And then sometimes the person, like, first of all, needs education about that. Like, okay, that's what's there under the surface. That's what's causing you some other problem. Like, so there are various things that can help a person if that's the case. One is understanding that it is always there, that they're just getting in touch with it. And if they can get in touch with it and then practice, it's like, I sometimes say it's like a, I'll give an analogy for that one. Like, if a person, like, I remember one time I had it, like, if you have like a wound, right, that has like blood and pus or something in it, like, it's like, if you just ignore it and like nothing touches it, then it doesn't hurt, but then as soon as something touches it, it hurts, right? And so then, like, I sometimes think, like, it's like that, like, it feels like they're touching the thing that is painful, but of course if you drain that, then you'll heal. If you don't drain it, it'll just get worse and worse, right? That the meditation, so sometimes educating the person, like, the meditation is actually, like, you're sort of in a safe way letting out, like, or you're healing those afflictions by looking at them and then pass them, then bring your mind back to something peaceful, rather than distracting yourself. That I sometimes use this analogy, it's like draining the wound or something, and then you'll get to peace. But first you have to be willing to see what's there. Does that make sense? Like, so I remember, like, when I had that wound, I had a wound one time like that, and I went to the doctor, and he was like, well, I might have to, like, pierce it and drain it. I was like, oh, that sounds like really unpleasant. So I can relate to the person with meditation. It was like, for me it was physiological. I was like, I don't know, like, I'm a little nervous about that. But, and it did hurt at first, but then it got better, is the point. That meditation can be like that if somebody's been avoiding certain things, is another point. And the last one that I would say is that they can apply what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying, that maybe they may have to first almost do a contemplative meditation first. Like, okay, I'm caught up in all this stuff, and that stuff is causing me suffering. And like understanding how the different thoughts and how their engagement, the way they engage with their own thoughts and feelings and causes them suffering. If they have a little more education about that, to understand, well, why would I still want to do something that's unpleasant for me at the beginning? It'll get to something pleasant, but they may not have that experience for a while. If they have, like the person who can just, a little bit of meditation can decrease their discursive thoughts, they get some pleasure, or just the pleasant of like a minute. I mean, I'm talking like 1 minute of pleasant. Okay, well, they might want to do it again. But if what their experience is more like all this, like, it's like dipping into, it's like touching the wound or something, I guess. then they may need more education. Like, why would I want to do that? And how will it help me? And that if you do that for a while, it eventually will get you to more peace, but it's not going to be at first, because what you're doing is you're touching all the stuff that's under the surface. And for some people, that really is their experience. Does that make sense? Where like, they sit down, you say, watch your breath, and there's like this continuous flow of like unpleasant emotions and thoughts and feelings there. And I've had people come to me and ask that, like, all right, I've had various people come, like, they say, well, like, you know, somebody told me to meditate, and like, I went to try to meditate, and all these thoughts, like, about murder and death, and like, images of bloody things came, it was like, it was horrible, like, you know, and I was like, you know, and it was like, then they were afraid of that, so they couldn't, and it was like, well, that's just, like, they didn't understand, those are just passing thoughts, like, just let them go, you know, like, or is it, they sort of got so scared by that that they couldn't. I'm giving one example, right? But there are all kinds of examples like that, or somebody who has so much fear, you know, they sit down to meditate and they start to feel the fear that's under the surface. So they need education then a little bit about, like, you know, it's
That,
just
I mean,
thoughts
I
and
do
let it go.
explain it as, you know, a wave.
Yeah.
You know, it's like the ocean. It
Yeah,
just comes
exactly.
and goes, but you shouldn't focus on like that one thought.
Right, exactly.
So I get confused, like, I mean, the only reason I want to develop calm abiding, I mean, for me, selfish reason, I just want to be peaceful
Mhm.
and whatever, privacy. So my question is like, so if you do an ethical meditation on bodhicitta, then I develop bodhicitta, then and then calm abiding, which is more pleasurable, which is more blissful,
Which is,
which
you
is
mean
more
like,
blissful, like pleasurable, like.
oh, I see, like, in the long run, my answer would be, in the long run, bodhicitta.
I mean, the short run, I mean.
The short run, it depends. Like, still, actually, I think. I mean, I guess I'll just differentiate. Like, there's a physiological thing that happens sometimes with calm abiding that's different. That's specifically like a blissful experience, but actually, it's different. Like, because with calm abiding, there's still. I think actually bodhicitta. That's my answer. Like, that would be my answer, because even from a pleasure perspective, right? Like, they say that. Like, let's say the person develops calm abiding, or is progressing towards calm abiding, and they have some of the physiological bliss. But still, that person has to worry, right? Like, well, if I get distracted, or circumstances come along that make me not able to meditate, then I'll lose that, right? Whereas the person who has bodhicitta, nothing can take that away. Like, even bad things that happen, they feel joy, right? Like, even if people are bothering them, they feel, like, you know, if you're, like, let's say you have bliss from calm abiding, but then somebody comes along and distracts your meditation, right? Then they can create an obstacle. Whereas if you have bodhicitta, nobody can create an obstacle for you, because you see them and you love them, and actually, when they're trying to create the obstacle, you have more love for them. So that nothing can, if you have bodhicitta, nothing can harm you. Whereas if you just have calm abiding, things can still harm you.
So that means you have to be in meditation all the time with calm abiding?
Yeah, with calm abiding, the problem is like, I mean, even if you develop some concentration, right, like if you, let's see, say right, there are stories like it's not permanent, right? It's not a permanent phenomena, right? So like, if the person then leaves retreat, and then like so if they stay in retreat and they just stay concentrating, then they can stay in that. But then like, say a war comes, right? Then they can't meditate, you know, something like they have to leave, or there's like a zoning problem that somebody takes their house, something, you know, then they have a problem, right? Because then they have to deal with all these external things, and then their concentration is harder to concentrate, and then, whereas bodhicitta, they won't have that problem.
So like if you develop calm abiding, can you like just die and then be born as God?
Is it, say
Can
again?
you just die and be born as a God? I mean,
Yeah, and also, right, then you just take rebirth as a god, but then that runs out. Whereas
yeah.
bodhicitta never runs out. They say it's like a one-time, what's it called, like, that analogy, like, a virtue like just calm abiding without bodhicitta, they say it's like a tree that produces like fruit once and then dies. Okay? Whereas if you have bodhicitta, it's like a tree that produces fruit forever.
Yeah.
So then in other words, the pleasure doesn't stop then. The positive results never stop.
So the pleasure is the way you're thinking, and it's just the way you think, right?
It's not just the way you think, it's partly the way you think, but then it affects, it's also how you feel, and it's also the karmic results of that. So, I mean, so it leads to also karmic results that bring all that good results.
At the end of the day, it's what you're projecting, right? What you're putting out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Fidel, if you get calm abiding, you have so much equanimity that, you know, everything falls in place. Your bodhicitta, whatever, is with the proper motivation, I guess.
Only if you apply that to bodhicitta, yeah. If you apply the karma binding to bodhicitta, then it's easier to develop.
I want to stay in the pleasure anymore.
I mean, in a lifetime, can you get like bodhicitta?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, lots of people have realized bodhicitta in one lifetime. Like, and that's totally possible, actually. Like, I remember once, I'll just share a story. Like a friend of mine told me this, that he was also close. He was close to Rinpa Rinpoche, who was very famous to have realized bodhicitta. He actually Rinpa Rinpoche practiced with Babonka Rinpoche and realized bodhicitta in retreat. They say, but then he was saying this to this. My friend was a Western person, you know, and he said Rinpa Rinpoche said to him, "Why don't you come to a retreat with me and I'll teach you, like kind of the way Babonka Rinpoche taught me. I'll teach you." And then he said, it won't take long at all to realize renunciation. Actually, he said, you'll realize renunciation really fast. Like, there'll be no problem at all. He said it'll take longer to realize bodhicitta, but if you stay, it'll happen. Like, if you just stay here and keep doing retreat, then it'll happen. Don't worry. Like, he said, but that'll take longer. It's a little harder. He said it's harder than renunciation. He said to him, but if you stay, then you'll realize that. So, like, that's an example, like, where he was saying, like, it's totally achievable just by practicing these teachings. You know, the Lam Rim is taught how to do it. But you have to actually, you know, spend the time practicing. So. But yeah, it's totally possible to realize bodhicitta for sure.
Dr. Lauren, so like realization of emptiness, sunyata, bodhicitta is also irreversible. Like once you realize it, it's forever. Is that the understanding? It cannot deteriorate.
They say that bodhicitta, like there are examples of people who realized bodhicitta in the early phases after a person realized bodhicitta, it's possible to lose it. There are some famous stories, like there's one famous story where somebody realized bodhicitta and then somebody came and like, what was it? I think they asked for their, it was in India, and I can't remember the exact, where the person asked for something unreasonable and the person got so frustrated they lost their bodhicitta motivation. But there comes a point where it's irreversible. Like if you go, like if you think of the first, I forget exactly where it is, at the beginning of the path of accumulate, you know, there are like the 5 paths, right? And I know that for sure at the low, like there's the low, middle, and great levels of the path of accumulation. At the low level of the path of accumulation, for sure it can still be lost. I can't remember, there's somewhere later in there where it becomes irreversible. I can't remember what level of the path. But at the very beginning, the person can still reverse, because they're not familiar as much with it. But then there comes a point where it's so ingrained in their being that it becomes unlosable or something. But I can't remember exactly which level of the path. So yeah, at the beginning it's losable and then it becomes unlosable.
But if you're born, like they say, like his holiness, when he's born, he's not born with bodhicitta already. He just have to practice again, right?
Yeah, and it comes easy, like.
I mean, it becomes easier, but he has to practice. He can't just like.
Yeah, they say like some beings like that, like they just hear it once, and then like you read stories like that where they hear, you know, you read a lot of biographies where they just went to somebody who was like, they went to if they realized in a past life where you read like, oh, there's a child and they went to a teaching and then like they just heard a brief teaching and they realized it actually. That's because they had done it in the past life. Okay, so going back, so I'll finish this section later. So, right, so I was making this point. If you have bliss and pliancy, then that naturally stops laziness, right? But of course, like bliss and pliancy, somebody pointed out in the commentary, of course that's a result, right? So you can't say, oh, I want to overcome my laziness, let me apply bliss and pliancy, because you don't have bliss and pliancy yet, if we're beginning, right? So here he's saying, so in order to develop the bliss and pliancy, you need joyous effort, right? Which is so we're going to go through 4. So the first one he lists is bliss and pliancy. He says to get to that, you need joyous effort, right? A kind of joyous effort is this kind of great joy and this kind of great effort, a great effort that comes joyfully, right? And actually, if you think about it this way, joyous effort is one of the 6 perfections, right? But also, just think about it this way: if a person has joyous effort, like where they take joy in making humongous effort, I mean, you'll progress at anything you're doing, right? In other words, anything you take joyous effort in, you're going to make humongous progress, because first of all, you're willing to put forth humongous effort, but also if you feel joy in it, you don't get discouraged and you don't want to like stop. You know, you want to keep applying yourself over time. So joyous effort is what leads to bliss and pliancy and leads to great progress. But of course, Now you say, so joyous effort is a humongous antidote to laziness. But then, of course, you say, well, but I don't have joyous effort yet, so how do I get that, right? And so he says, well, the one that causes that is, I think he says intense aspiration.
Sustained aspiration.
Sustained aspiration, that's the word, sustained aspiration. So aspiration, right, like really wanting something, like really feeling a kind of aspiring to something, right? Feeling inspired and aspiring to meditative concentration. But then he says, but what gives rise to that aspiration? And he says, firm faith. So if you think of it from the order of actual practice, right, you start with developing firm faith. Then through faith, you get aspiration. Through aspiration, you get joyous effort. And through joyous effort, you get bliss and pliancy, and that's how you overcome laziness.
So found faith in what?
And that's what I'm about to explain. Yeah, you're good at this. You always ask. You're smart. Last time too, I was like, oh, that was really good. You were asking the question like, that's good. So what he's saying here is this, and this is actually, he explains it right now. Is Lama Tsongkhapa is saying, it's a really important point here, because like faith, I sometimes think, I think it's the correct translation of the Tibetan word, and yet I think it's problematic in a way. Because in our culture, I think linguistically, sometimes faith can imply like, there are all these like, in Western history, in other words, the word faith is sort of associated with like, there's blind faith, there's leap of faith, right? There's these ideas from like St. Thomas Aquinas and other people about what faith is that are very Western. Here, faith is not, what he's saying in faith here is not like that. It's not something like it is in Western culture, exactly. What he's saying here is, and Ken Rinpoche kind of explains this, there are different kinds of faith, but firm faith in this sense, that, let's say it right. Faith in this context means you see the benefits of something, and so you trust in it. I want to give some examples. Like, and I've said this before, but it's like, so it's not like, let's say it straight away.
More apt to be you're honest with it.
I guess I'll say this like, because sometimes we say like faith, like in the Western culture, people sometimes will say like faith in God, right, or something like that. Here it's more like, in this context, it's more like this. I want to give an analogy. Like, I'll give two analogies. One is superficial, and then another is a little closer to this. The superficial one I'll give is this. I sometimes have used this one before. If you like watch, if you're thinking of getting like a new phone, what's it called? Smartphone, right? And then you like do a bunch of research, like what's the best smartphone? You start asking people, like, what's your smartphone? What do you like? And like you read, what's the word, like Consumer Reports, I guess, or like you start reading online, and eventually you come to some conclusion. Oh, like the best smartphone for the money is this one, right? And then you think, and then you have a thought. I think that's the best. I think in the market right now, that's the best smartphone, right? Then you have faith that that's the best one, and it's based on having asked people and having researched it. I want to give a bigger analogy for a second. But like, let's say somebody is like a young person, right? And they're thinking about what they want to do with their life or their career, right? And so like they think a lot, like, well, what would I want to do? And like, what would be a good career? And then they pick some field, right? And they decide, I'm going to go to school for that. I'm going to like try to get my degree to become a whatever, right? And so that requires a lot of faith, actually, right? Like, let's say, I'll give it a, let's say a person decides they want to get in, let's say somebody's graduating high school or something like that, or just out of high school, and they decide they want to go and become an engineer, right? So that means they have to go through 4 years of college, and a lot of engineering, you have to get like a master's degree, right? So it's maybe 6 years of school. Right? So the person has to think, I'm going to dedicate 6 years of my life in order to get, and all they're going to get from that is, first of all, if they finish, then they'll get a piece of paper, right, that says, you have a master's degree in structural engineering or in whatever, right? And they don't have any proof that that's going to lead to a good career. But they reasonably think that, based on talking, maybe if they're smart, right, they may have done research online, they've talked to some engineers, they've asked people questions, they've read about the school, they've read about job opportunities and so on, right? And they come to some conclusion, I have faith that getting that diploma and degree will help me have a career I want to have. Does that make sense? And that's faith. In this context, that's what faith is. Does that make sense? It's like trust. It's belief. It's a reasoned belief that something is worth the effort to achieve. that make sense? Whether it's something very small like buying a smartphone, or whether it's something big like getting going through 6 years of school, or if if the person says they want to be a neurosurgeon, right? Then it's like what, 12 years, I think. Yeah, so it's 12 or 13 or something. Right. So a person says, "Oh, I want to be a neurosurgeon. I'm willing to dedicate 12 years of my life." Right. And they would say, like, there are going to be a lot of those years when you're doing your, what's it called, residency, where you're not going to sleep. You're going to have very little sleep. You're going to have to work 15 hours a day or something. Right. So the person has to have a lot of faith then, like a faith that's like a reasoned belief. Somehow it's going to be worthwhile to be a neurosurgeon. 12 years of my life, and 3 of those years I won't hardly sleep. I won't get to rest.
Millions of dollars.
Spend millions of dollars on that, and so on, right? And I'm going to owe money, at the end, right? Whether you're becoming a structural engineer, or I'm just giving you these examples, right? In any of those cases, right, I'm going to owe all this money, I'm going to put in all this time, and there's some faith. Well, I can see that, person researches. First of all, I think I would like that job. It's an interesting kind of job. There are opportunities. I'll make money at it, whatever. And so the person thinks it through, and then the person might say, "Oh wow, I could pay off the loans this fast if I get that. If I earn the standard salary from this graduate school, then I can pay off the loans this fast. That makes sense. I'm going to try it. I'm going to go for it." So it's the faith that comes through seeing the benefits. And actually, all the time, I want to point something out. All the time, people put humongous effort based on faith. Does that make sense? I'll give you these examples, right? People go to 6 years of school. People go to 12 years of school. But even for other things, right? Like people, if you think about it in the world, right? Like somebody has the idea, I'll be happy if I marry this kind of person and have children, right, or something. And so they make humongous effort to find those circumstances, right? Sometimes it makes them happy, and sometimes it doesn't. Of course, depends on the depends on how it works out. But everything we do, this is the point. This kind of faith we're getting at here, everything we do is most of what we do, as better way to put it, is based on such faith. Does that make sense? Faith in the sense of a belief or a firm conviction that doing that will have some benefit for me. And so, and so whether that's, purchasing an item or getting an education or starting a family, or I'm thinking of what do people do in the world, right? Or people spend humongous amounts of money, right? To go to people do that to go to a concert or the Super Bowl or something, right? People spend all this money, and humongous effort to fly somewhere very far away, and so on, right? There's all these things people do, and it's all based on some kind of faith that that's going to be worthwhile. So here, what we're getting at is that, right? You get firm faith. In this case, it's not in some external thing, right? But it's a firm faith that developing meditative concentration and calm abiding will lead to humongous benefits. Does that make sense? And now you can see, if you develop firm faith in something, then you start to aspire to it. Does that make sense? Like if you think of the example of the person who becomes an engineer, right? First they have to develop some faith, I believe that's a right career for me. Then they start to aspire, I want to get into the school, and I want to get accepted to school, and I got to, actually if they're doing that in high school, there's more than 6 years, right? They're starting to work hard in high school to get good grades to get into that. So it becomes a whole process of, what's the word? Rajiv, you said it, which is aspire,
I use the word
sustained, right?
Yeah, sustained.
Sustained aspiration, right? So you can see how, because it requires sustained, if you think of if you think of this idea of school, right? It requires sustained aspiration. It's not just a moment of going, oh, I wish I could do that. Because that's different, right? When you see a little kid, if a little kid says, oh, it'd be cool to be an engineer and build bridges, but then 2 minutes later they say, oh, I want to be a fireman, or oh, I want to be a makeup artist, or oh, I want to be a, they can jump around, right? But sustained aspirations where you really see the benefits for you, and then you start to really aspire strongly to that thing, right? And actually, do you see now the point here? Firm faith in anything. Let's use the example. I'm going to go back one last time through the school, and then I'm going to apply it to meditation, right? So the person says, I'll just go back to the engineer, right? The person says, starts about firm faith. That would really be the right career for me. I'd love to build things. It'd be so cool to build things, right? Then they start aspiring. So they start working hard in high school. They apply to college. They work hard for, and they start working hard. That's where the joyous effort comes in. Does that make sense? That person then starts to feel even if it's hard, I don't care. I'm going to keep trying. I want to do this. I want to be the best at this. I want to get good grades in college so I can get into the best graduate school for my field, because then I'll be really successful, right? It's based on a worldly, not a spiritual goal, a worldly goal, right? They never get the bliss and pliancy, of course, but they get the other three. Does it make sense? You can actually get to the point where you have this joyous effort, right? Where you try incredibly hard. Then you meet people like around here. You always meet. I meet a lot of people like that, where then they get their first job in their field, right? And they're willing to work like 60, 70 hours a week, right? They have this kind of joyous effort. Of course, it's for something not, from a Buddhist perspective, it's not particularly meaningful, but necessarily, unless they have bodhicitta motivation or something. But the process is psychological. Now, how do you apply that to calm abiding? Does that make sense? And the problem, sometimes say, oh, it's hard to develop calm abiding. Sometimes people say that, but I think it's because we don't see the benefit. Whereas it's not as hard as developing. It's not as hard. It doesn't take as much effort as becoming a neurosurgeon does. Actually, I know some people I have some friends who are like professional musicians. The amount of time they they put in what was it? I can't remember the number of. I was they're I don't know, they're in they're not young people. They've spent hours and hours every day of their life. They never take a break, right? They're in their 40s maybe, and they've done this since they were 8 or something. And they never stop practicing their instrument, every day, right? Even if they're on vacation, they take their instrument with them and they practice for and they're oh, I was lazy today. I only put in an hour. Usually I put in 4 hours of practice in order to sustain their level of expertise, right? Calm mind is easier than any of those things. It's easier than becoming that, right? It's easier, it doesn't take that much effort. So it's that we don't see the benefit. We see the benefit in worldly things, so we make huge effort at those things. And we don't see the benefit of this, so we don't put much effort, and therefore we don't achieve it. Does that make sense? So sometimes people say, oh, it's hard to develop calm abiding, but maybe it's because we don't do the first step. So now Lama Tsongkhapa says, so how do you develop firm faith? So he says it's not a leap of faith. You analyze, just like you would if you want to think of doing some other, buying something or going somewhere or going to school or something. And so now he goes through so you would think about, why would I want to develop calm abiding until you get this firm faith, right? And so he says, first of all, think of this life. And this is this next section. He says, think about the positive qualities. And he says, so first of all, it's getting at kind of what you were raising, Phil. So the person would start by thinking, wow, imagine that. If I just make a little bit of effort, if I make effort for just a few, it's less than becoming a neurosurgeon, right? Just a few years. Sometimes they say 6 months a person can develop calm abiding. They say, the best, they say people who have a particular, I don't mean from a past life they achieved it, I just mean a person who has a reasonable ability. They say 6-month retreat and a person can have calm abiding. They sometimes say that can happen, some people that happens. And then what he's saying here is, so first of all, just through that, right, your mind, he says, your mental happiness and physical comfort greatly increase, and you stay happy in this lifetime. So imagine that though, he's understating it in a way there, right? That person who achieves that experiences bliss, actually, right? A bliss that's more intense than any bliss you've experienced yet in your life. Does that make sense? It's both physical and mental, right? Their body and their mind are incredibly blissful. Then also, they have this pliancy, right? So in other words, from that point on, as long as the person continues to practice, they have this flexibility and lightness, right? They don't feel fatigued. They don't feel that person will not have. It suppresses all their afflictive emotions. Partly also, right? So while they're practicing that, they can suppress jealousy, pride, anger, craving. All the. They have a technique that successfully suppresses all their afflictive emotions that cause mental disturbance, and they experience this kind of physiological and psychological mental bliss and flexibility and joy and sort of, what's the word, serviceability they call it, this ability to sort of apply themselves to whatever they want. So you start to go, that alone is better than anything else. I mean, the benefits of that are humongous, right? Just from this life's perspective, that's more pleasurable than having a bunch of, because actually if you have a lot of money, let's say, right, which I'm not, it's fine, but if you have a lot of money, actually, then you're worried usually, right? If you see anybody who has a lot of money, right now, right, then the stock market's going up and down every day, then the person is worrying, what if my money goes down? Oh no, where can I was talking to somebody about that, because he was he's getting near retirement. It was a friend of mine, and he was saying it's not good to put money in the bond market because that's going to go down, but it's not good. But I feel nervous having it in the stock market, but I don't want to leave it in cash because then there's inflation. So he has no place to. He's then I can't. How am I going to retire? Because I don't know anywhere to put my retirement money, so how can I retire? And my point is, like this is much more pleasurable than that. So he said, so he's saying, first of all, think of the benefits for this life. And he says, you'll be happy and peaceful. Like, and everybody says, oh, I want, like, inner peace or something like that, right? Like, if you have calm abiding, you have inner peace, actually. And if you want pleasure, you have pleasure, right? I don't mean, like, not sensory pleasure, but physical, actually, physical and mental pleasure you have. Then he says, right, he says here, which we just said, due to the physical and mental pliancy, the mind is fit to make use of any virtuous object at will. Right? So that means, actually, like, if you have calm abiding, actually, like, what he's getting at here is this, in a way. If you have calm abiding, you can sit down and you can apply yourself to love, for example, meditation on love. And what will happen is, and not like us, where we just sort of try to think about love, but your mind will become completely suffused with love. Your mind will become overwhelmed with love, like where your mind will be 100% focused on and absorbed within love. So it'll be this experience of, like, infinite love then. Same thing with compassion. Like, whatever topic you apply yourself to, your mind will completely absorb itself in that and completely suffuse itself with that. So, like, it's amazing, right? A totally amazing sort of thing to even imagine having, right? This kind of mind like that. Then he says also, since when you have calm abiding, uncontrolled distraction towards mistaken objects has subsided. So faulty conduct does not occur much, while whatever virtue you do has great strength. So remember earlier we said, if you don't have calm abiding, your virtue is relatively weak. We were talking about that last time. Here he's saying, if you develop calm abiding, your virtue will be incredibly powerful. And also, like, now, like, when we're without calm abiding, we try to be ethical and we try to do the right thing, but we forget sometimes. We lose our awareness, we lose our mindfulness, we lose our introspection. He's saying, if you have calm abiding, you don't lose those things anymore. You have them all the time, and so you don't. It's easy to not sort of fall into. Like for us, like, you can. What's there to say, right? You can recognize, oh, I have this negative pattern, and, like, I wish I could stop it, but then it's hard to stop it, right? And then, like, sometimes you stop it for a little while, and then you fall back into it. You have calm abiding, you have a powerful mind that when you say I want to stop it, then you just stop it, right? Like, it's an incredibly powerful tool you have now, your mind. Where now our tool is sort of not as powerful. Then he says, and this is other benefits, right? He's saying, also, in dependence upon calm abiding, positive qualities such as clairvoyance and magical powers can be achieved. Right? So this is, he's saying, something's called worldly cities, or worldly attainments. Right? So that's just true. Like, in Buddhism, they say, if you have achieved calm abiding, then it's possible to have clairvoyance that can, whether it's like reading other people's minds, or knowing your own and others' past and future lives, or and so on. There are all these, like, those are like clairvoyances. There are also magic abilities. They say people with calm abiding can like fly. Milarepa, they say, famously, he flew through the sky, or they can sink under the earth. They can become invisible. There are all these, like, magical powers that come with calm abiding. So he's saying, if you're interested in that, you can achieve those through calm abiding. Then he says, much more importantly, in particular, the realization of special insight that realizes emptiness arises upon it, and so you can cut the root of samsara, right? So what he's getting at is, without calm abiding, you can't actually cut the root of samsara. Whereas you can understand emptiness intellectually, but you can't develop special insight, and you can't realize emptiness directly then, eventually. So he's saying, you need calm abiding to realize emptiness directly and become free from samsara. So if you're interested in liberation from samsara, you have to realize calm abiding, right? If you want to become a Buddha, also, you have to realize calm abiding. There's no way to become enlightened without calm abiding. So if you realize calm abiding, you have the prerequisite to realize emptiness, to achieve liberation, to achieve Buddhahood, and so on. And then, like, and as people were saying, right, if you achieve calm abiding, actually, then it's easy to realize bodhicitta, right? Because your mind won't get distracted. So now when we try to cultivate bodhicitta, we can make progress and we can achieve it, but it's, like, difficult, right? Because our mind jumps away, we get distracted. If you have calm abiding, your mind will penetrate those topics, will absorb in those topics, and you can quickly realize any topic. And actually, one thing he doesn't mention here, but it's true, is if somebody's realized calm abiding and they've received like the teachings on the Vajrayana, then they can achieve enlightenment in one lifetime. Actually, it's like not difficult. That's possible if you've achieved it.
So like, if you go back, like joyful effort and the expectation. So joyful effort is a state of mind, right?
Mhm.
So expectation, is it a state of mind too?
Aspiration. Right.
Expectation, when you have expectations, you do something like you expect to get like, to achieve calm abiding. And then you do it like, I just want to achieve calm abiding, expectation. And then joyful effort is the effort you put in like,
Effort to achieve that, yeah.
yeah, but what about expectation? I mean, what's
So-
the difference?
I guess I'm a little confused because in the order he's saying it's faith and then aspiration,
Uh-huh.
but you're saying expectation.
Joyful effort and expectation, because sometimes you do things, you don't know if you're doing it out of joyful effort or you're doing it out of expectation.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
In this case, actually, it's like I think in this particular case, actually, joyful effort and actually even aspiration includes expectation. So this is not a negative version of expectation, but it's a kind of particular version of expectation where it's like it's an important point here. Like, it's not having expectations of other people or expectations of. It's a very specific kind of. I mean, he doesn't use the word expectation, but since you're saying,
Yeah.
it's recognizing that if you create the cause of something, the result will happen. Anyway, so if a person, like, let's say, if I want to grow tomatoes in my yard,
Yeah.
and I plant tomato seeds and I water them, I have an expectation that the plant will grow. And that's why I make the effort, right, to go out there and weed and water it and all that,
Yeah.
because I know the cause will lead to the result. So in that sense, that kind of, in other words, an expectation that causes lead to results is realistic.
Yeah.
And so in this sense, yeah, you can have an expectation. If I create the causes of calm abiding, the result will happen. If I create all the prerequisites and I apply all these methods he's about to teach, then the result will happen. That's a positive version of expectation because it's within the understanding of cause and effect. Like the person who goes to graduate school, like or school, like college, and like they're going with the expectation they'll get a degree, right? Like if they, and be able to, if they're becoming an engineer, they understand, well, I'm doing this in order to do that, and these are the causes of that. If I get a bachelor's degree, I get a master's. If I get a master's, then this kind of job opens up. So it's a reasonable expectation.
Because some teachers say that you don't have expectation at all.
But not to have, I think, like, right, because they say expectations is the root of unhappiness, or, so to have the expectation is fine, but not to be attached to the result of it. Like, if you can't achieve calm abiding, right, or if you grow those tomatoes and they don't grow, crows come and eat them. You know what I'm saying? 'Cause things happen in life,
Yeah.
So it's the having the expectation, but not being attached to the result.
One point I'll make, this is my own view now, it's not, I mean, Lama Tsongkhapa's not saying this, but part of joyous effort, I think, that part of it, the joy, which is what you were asking about, is, I say this right, like, I guess I want to differentiate, like, like I don't do much gardening, right? So if I were to plant tomatoes, and then they didn't grow, I would probably say, oh, I give up, I'm never going to try tomatoes again. That's pretty much. But if somebody loves gardening, if somebody has joyous effort, right, then they become fascinated. Like, I'm just giving this as an analogy now, right? Like, so somebody who with joyous effort, they like plant tomatoes and they don't grow, like the crows come, right? And that person they have joyous effort, right? So they go, oh wow, cool, now I know about crows. They eat tomatoes. How am I going to figure it out for next year that I'm going to like set up a net? Or am I going to create a thing? Or am I going to do it under the awning, the crow won't come there? Or am I going to do it here? Like, how am I going to set it up so the crow won't come to this, or will I move my tomato plant over to this other side where the crows don't come in? Or, like, they have joyous effort, so even the bad things that happen, they feel actually more enthusiasm. So the point here is yeah, I mean, if somebody goes, I get your point now, if somebody goes into a retreat with joyous effort, but they have too big of expectations. There are people like that, where like, I've heard some stories of people like that, where they went into a retreat and they were like, well, I think I'll achieve, like, I'm going to achieve enlightenment in a year or something, like, of course they become disappointed because it's not realistic expectation. But if you have joyous effort, the idea is like, so the person goes to a retreat and they like, you know, what's the word, and they like get stuck at a certain, let's say they're practicing calm abiding and they reach the 5th level and then then they're stuck there, right? Well, and they can't somehow move on to the 6th level of concentration to get to, because they're 9 before you get to calm abiding. Like, the person who has joyous effort would be like, wow, that's interesting. Okay, what's going wrong? How do I figure this out? Let me go ask a teacher. Let me study more Dharma texts. Then I'll apply it to my meditation again and see which one, you know, this Lama taught this technique. Let me try it. This other Lama taught this technique. Let me try it. They would like keep, and they don't, joyous effort means you don't get discouraged by obstacles, right? That the obstacles actually make you even more, like, fascinated. Like, I'll overcome that eventually. You know, like, there was the effort, you know, it's like the person who, I remember, like, I remember that I had a friend, like, who, actually, she used to come to the center years ago, and she, like, was trying to become a doctor, and then she failed one test, you know, like, so she was stuck, and she couldn't, like, she failed one exam that you have to pass in order to, but, like, she wasn't going to give up. She was like, I'm going to take a class, I'm going to get the materials, I'm going to, you know, quiz myself, like, she was like, I'm going to keep, you know, she wasn't going to give up, she put all this effort in, right, and she had this strong sense of a goal. And of course, she studied, and she took extra time, and she took the, you know, pre-exam, and she took whatever, and then she passed it. So the point is, with calm abiding, it'll be like that. Does that make sense? So you can have unrealistic expectations, but with joyous effort, it's like, this result is so beneficial, I don't care if there's obstacles. I'll figure out, like, the obstacles are part of my learning. You know, and like, I was saying one more point about that. I know one monk who, I think he's a Westerner who I think achieved calm abiding. I think so. But like, he was telling me that, he was saying like, you know, there came points where it was like, well, how do you get past this obstacle? And then like, he would ask one Lama, and the Lama would say, well, I didn't have that obstacle, I don't know. Like, so he went and asked some other Lama, you know, like he kept asking people, how do you get over this obstacle? You know, like, and finally he would like ask, he was like, well, I need somebody who has achieved calm abiding, but had a hard time getting there, to ask them the question. You know, he kept asking, and finally he found answers, I think, for those questions. Like, you have to have that kind of mind. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Where you don't have unrealistic expectations, and where your joyous effort is like, you know, you have so much, it comes from the faith and the aspiration though, right? That you have to like see, like the person with the medical thing, like it's like, who wants to become a doctor, it's like, this is so much what I want to achieve that I don't care. Obstacles are part of my path, obstacles are how I learn. That's okay, like that's how I'm gonna make progress.
So you have to accept the obstacles. Like,
Exactly, yeah. Accept them, yeah, embrace them even.
Yeah, embrace them. Be
That's
a
what it
friend,
says.
become a friend.
Yeah, and like, and actually you could think, like, I'm glad I'm having this obstacle. Then someday when somebody else is trying to achieve calm abiding, they could ask me, and like, I had the obstacle, you know, it's like, that'd be great then, you know, like, I could be a resource for others. Sometimes I thought that was my, actually, like, just in this role of like explaining Buddhism, I thought, like, because sometimes I was laughing at home, not recently, but a while ago, I was thinking like, I think I've made every like mistake sometimes. Like sometimes I've made so many mistakes that it's really good. Because then when people ask about mistakes, I know about that part at least.
Yeah.
It's like I did a lot of things wrong. So that, at least I can understand what somebody could do wrong because I did the thing wrong. That's good. So it can help somebody else. But so you get this idea of, you think about the benefits, and I think like part of what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying here is, if you want to overcome laziness, you get the idea now. You have to really, it's not just some superficial thing like, oh yeah, it'd be good to, like, think of it that way, right? Like, think of how much effort people make for worldly purposes, right? And then think about, like, that you have to see that much benefit at least, right? If you're going to make the effort to achieve something like calm abiding. And if you think, oh, it's like, if your mind is like, oh, it's so hard, or oh, it seems difficult, then you're not seeing, like, you're not really seeing the benefits, right, in a real way, and so you're not going to achieve it then, because you don't have firm faith. You have a kind of flimsy faith, maybe. Oh, that'd be nice, right? But that's not firm faith, right? And I'll just make one point, like, pause and think about it, right? Like, I was thinking this, like, right, if you talk to somebody who, let's give it, I mean, right, somebody's going to graduate school, I'll give another analogy, right? Like somebody who's joining the Marines, right? Like when somebody joins the Marines, right, they're going to go into, where's that place where you go to do the...
Paris Island.
Yeah, Paris Island, that's it. Right, like, you have to have humongous faith and aspiration and joy, right? You have to have a huge aspiration to get through that, don't you? If you or when you flunk out.
It's like a why, right? So a lot of Marines, they join the Marine Corps for different reasons.
Right.
I mean, you have to find your why to be like there. You know, do I want to be a Marine? Do I want to be, you know, whatever it is. I mean, you know, do I want to serve my country? Do I want to be pretty much, you know, the best fighting force in the world? And that will get you through it, because like my platoon, there was about, I think, 90 guys there. I think 50 of us graduated. So, and it's grueling.
It's almost half.
It is grueling. So you have to be like, I'm gonna finish this. Like, you know, it's funny, like the first time I got out to the island, it's like the fastest way you're gonna get off the island is you graduate. And that was my thing. Like, after a day on the island, I was like, this sucks. I wanna get off this island. So, like, the fastest way off the island is, like, graduate. so it's like,
That's a good plan.
you know, you gotta do, so any little injuries or this, oh no, like, I'm not hearing that. Like, I'm gonna push through this because graduation day is this day, and I'm gonna get off this island, and then, you know.
But so listen, just one part of what you said. You have to find your why. That was what you just said, right?
Right.
So the same goes here, right? In other words, you have to find your why, which is, what's the benefit? Why do I care? Why is this important? And then you'll make that kind of effort, and then it's not hard, right, to achieve any result if you're willing to make that kind of effort.
I forgot what.
And so I'm just using that as an analogy. That's why I asked you. It's a good analogy, right? Like, when something really matters to a person, you know, then obstacles, like you were just saying, right? Injury, an obstacle, I'm pushing through it to get through the result. In this case, though, it's a great analogy, right? What Lama Tsongkhapa is saying is, the island that you're going to go off, in this case, is samsara. Right? Like, you're going to get off the island of samsara if you achieve calm abiding and special insight combined, right, into emptiness. So he's saying, like, you know, and even the point about having companions, right? He says that one of the prerequisites, right, is have companions of similar view, right? He's saying, like, what is that? I mean, you think about what's part of that, right? Part of that is like, what does he say, right? That increases your aspiration, right? There's other people who are saying, like, you know, you can do it. You know, you can get off the island of samsara. You can achieve the result of calm abiding and special insight. It's a great analogy, is my point, right? And that we have to have that kind of aspiration, that kind of, aspiration, I'll call it, because that's the word they use. And then you can achieve the result. That's it.
But if you don't have like, like in Buddhism, like if you don't have like strong like morality, then just for effort you can't have it, can you?
Well, one point also I'll say about the morality part of it.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, it is a prerequisite, so you have to practice ethics in order to achieve calm abiding. But I'll also say one point, like, is you know, if you have the faith and the aspiration, if you really want to achieve calm abiding, part of it is like, I mean, you have to want to practice ethics by seeing the benefits, of course, but then also, and we were talking about this just a little bit last time, I think, like, you know, it's also, if you put yourself, especially in this kind of circumstance he's describing, right? Or so if you, that's why a lot of times, like, I'll just give, on a practical level, right? Like, a lot of times a person who says, okay, I want to really progress in calm abiding. First of all, they might go off first and do, like, this is why a lot of times, you know, in the Tibetan tradition, there's like nundro practices where people do like vajras, you know, purification practice and so on. So a lot of times what will happen is a person will do some retreat doing that, right? Purification, in order to like sort of make their ethics more firm. And part of the purpose of those preliminary practices, they call nundro, these like preliminary practices, is to create the right inner conditions, right? Like purifying your negative karma and purifying your ethical training in that sense. And then after that, they'll go do the calm abiding retreat. And of course, if you just did purification and you're in a retreat somewhere, it's easier. Now, I mean, still we can make mistakes in our ethics, but it's much easier, right? If you're somewhere, what does Lama Tsongkhapa say, right? Someplace quiet, you know, oftentimes at a retreat place, you know, someplace further where you've decreased your contact with other people. Of course, a lot of the temptations towards negative ethical actions, arise in our social interactions, right? So he's saying here, if you're off living a quiet place, most of the people around you are doing similar things. Hopefully, I mean, again, still anything can happen, but it should be easier to practice ethics in in that kind of situation. Does that make sense? Kind of,
Yeah.
you're not around people who are doing.
Like the environment can stop you from practicing, like, the
What's that?
environment can stop people from practicing all those stuff, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
If you're in the environment, like, can trigger you, like, little stuff can just trigger you.
Yeah, and so part of that is that we have to
Yeah.
put ourselves in the right situation.
Yeah.
And if I know, like let's say if I know, okay, I'm tempted to this kind of negative action,
Uh-huh.
then I need to avoid that, kind of, if I want to develop this, I have to avoid
Yeah.
those kind of places then, or I'm not going to progress,
Yeah.
and, so you have to put yourself in the right, if you're trying to progress in combining, you have to put yourself in the right circumstance. For
Yeah.
that.
Recently, the Ethics and Means Committee, Washington DC, a few weeks back, they signed up for MBST, the mindfulness thingy,
Oh, really?
and they're into it.
Oh, that's funny. Oh, that's really funny. The ethics, so you're saying mindful
So that ties in together.
That's good. Hopefully, in that case, the one will, some concentration will help the other direction.
It was in the news.
That's funny.
Oh, very interesting.
Wow. Well, I guess any other? Yeah, we should stop. Is there any other questions? Because just so you know, the next topic, which is a huge one, is well, not huge, but it's a long a section. Is choosing the right object of concentration. So choosing what object you're gonna, so right, because there is, once you have the right circumstances and you've overcome your laziness, right, and you're sort of having this faith and aspiration, then you have to choose what am I going to focus on, right? Because your mind is going to, you bring your mind inward, right? You sit in this posture, you bring your mind inward, and then you have to focus your mind on something to develop concentration. So the next topic we'll cover next class is how do you choose what topic, what object, what mental object you're going to focus on. Does that make sense? Because in meditation, you have to focus on something. And so the next question will be, for different people, there are different kinds of things to focus on that bring more benefit. And so we'll get into how do you choose that next time. But, I'll make a note, that's where we left off. But let's do the verses of dedication. The supreme jewel bodhicitta, where it has not arisen, may it arise and grow. Where it has arisen, may it not decrease, but increase more and more. In the snowy mountain paradise, you the source of good and happiness, all-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends.